Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Alex's Afternoon Art Show. Today we are continuing our Mortal Kombat drawings and we are drawing Reptile today. So, this means we're doing another redesign, as per usual, with our Mortal Kombat designs. And because this is Reptile, that means we have a lot of stuff to talk about, because Reptile is one of those characters who is just peaks and valleys. It's so many different things. There is nothing really consistent about his designs. So what I'm going for here is sort of similar to what we've got going on more recently, but it's also kind of not like that, and it's different in ways that I think are interesting, but we'll talk about that after the intro. So yeah, there'll be a lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of individual little itty-bitty elements, and there'll be a lot of color stuff and things like that, which we'll have to talk about later. So I suppose we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Anyways, I'll roll the intro, and then I'll show you what I have. So yeah. Okay, so this is where we're at. This is what we've got currently. So, as I said, it's similar to the more recent stuff. He is predominantly human-looking. I've not gone for the sort of lizard stuff too much. I'll zoom in and I'll have a little bit of a talk about what I mean when I say too much. So what I've gone for here is more of the hybrid thing of where he's mostly normal human man, but there's bits of sort of reptilian things, like his fingers are scaly and his arms have some scaling and stuff like that on them. But his face is and head are all fairly normal human man. There's a little bit of scaling on his chest, which I'm going to remove just for the sake of simplicity. I'm just going to keep it on his arms, hands, and that'll kind of be it. But yeah, what I've gone for here is that there's a little bit of hybridization going on. His eyes are reptilian. He's got the sort of single line sort of slit down the middle, like you would see on a lizard, because that's not too far is how I feel, but I think I just wanted to add a little bit of that in here, just so that we're not going too crazy with the shape-shifting stuff, because that's sort of in a single image that's more difficult to depict, and I think it's a bit more interesting. Again, this is the sort of problem with Reptile as a character, is that you sort of run into these issues of where it's, well, some people really like the lizard thing. I don't know how many people like that, but some people really like it. Some people much prefer him just being a normal human man. So I'm trying to split the difference a little bit, and I'm going for something where he's mostly normal human man. He'd still function like a pretty normal ninja, but there's these little bits of reptile skin and lizard stuff, reptilian elements. So now let's start going through things in the individual bits. Because I've decided to... So he's still got the sort of general idea of the robe, of the ninja robe. It's still got the same sort of general shape, but it's supposed to look a bit more like a coat. Because one of the things that I decided was, from observing a lot of Reptile's designs, generally he has these sort of kind of shabbier elements to his design. He's generally kind of a lot of the kind of robes and bits of armor and stuff like that are usually kind of damaged, a little bit worn. So I've gone for something here of where it's a bit sort of, again, as I say, shabby and kind of messy. So his robe is technically a coat, and he's got this under robe underneath it, which you can see has these sort of thin lines that go through, and it's the same little robe piece that's down here, and it goes into this sort of layered shoulders thing of where you can see it dipping down over his shoulders here, where it's this kind of layered thing. And then his hood is part of this long sort of scarf piece that tucks into the inside of the robe, and that sort of then flows out at the back. And so I think that it's just got a bit more interesting movement. It would lend to the sort of stealthier nature of the character, because a lot of stealthy characters, you generally see these sort of similar design elements where you see a lot of scarves and stuff like that. It's because it looks cool whenever they're running on rooftops. That's why. And so that's something I've incorporated here, of where I think it would look cool as he's running on rooftops and sneaking around the place. Granted, when Reptile sneaks around, he's usually invisible, so it wouldn't really be displayed in that same way, but I think that's a cooler element. So now, let's start talking a little bit about the hood. So the hood I've mostly sort of kept like fairly loose. It's a lot looser than it is in Mortal Kombat 1. In Mortal Kombat 1 he's got a fairly sort of tight hood. It kind of conforms very much to the shape of his head, but it does dip forward that little bit. Yeah, the Mortal Kombat 1 hood conforms much more to the shape of his head, whereas this is a little bit looser. It's a bit more in keeping with what a lot of the ninja hoods looked like in something like Mortal Kombat 11 or 10, something like that, where they're looser hoods. And so yeah, that's what I've gone for here. And it sort of, again, it bunches up a little bit around the neck and it's kind of loose and it flows into the scarf. I was originally going to have it loop around the front and have it then tuck over his shoulder, but I didn't want to have that because I felt like that would obscure too much of the like kind of coat robe thing. I didn't want to have too much overlapping stuff. So then I'll now talk about the mask. So the mask is built in such a way of where it's got these very defined sort of cheekbone shapes. That's what I've gone for here, because I'm not too huge on his mask in Mortal Kombat 1. His mask in Mortal Kombat 1 is very sort of flat. It's a very flat green. Here it's still going to be green, but it's not going to. But it's got a little bit more design going on it. It's got these, as I say, these very sort of defined cheekbone shapes, and then the front piece, which has this sort of almost. It has this kind of mouth shape here. I don't know if this mask would maybe work the same way that the mask works in a lot of his more reptilian designs, of where it opens and that's where the tongue comes out. I don't know if I'd go that far. It does have these sort of little shadows in there of where it dips in like quite far. It has enough depth to it that you can literally see a shadow forming there. But it's got, yeah, this sort of flat front piece where it kind of comes into this kind of cone at the front, and then it sits down and it has this kind of pointed chin on it here, as you can see. And it's got, yeah, more of this kind of, it's got more of a face shape to it. A lot of the masks generally that I've been doing so far would have more of a sort of, they're very, I would say, simple in design generally. Like, they're simple but thematic, i.e. Scorpion's mask, whenever I did that, it's more of a skull shape than what his masks usually are. That's an element from like Mortal Kombat 4 in Scorpion's designs, where his mask has this sort of skull shape. Because of him pulling off the hood and he's got the skull underneath. I felt like that made a little bit more sense. Sub-Zero's mask is is a bit more techy, because the Lin Kuei are typically a little bit more technological in the Mortal Kombat games, so that's what I went for, of where it's got the sort of all the little gas mask elements, where you'd be able to see his breath coming through, because that looks interesting and that kind of fits the character. Kitana's mask is very ornate because she's supposed to be she's supposed to be this sort of princess character, and so that it makes sense for it to be very kind of have these little silver trimmings, and it mostly being fairly kind of conical and simple, but ornate and fancy in the same way. Same way that Melina's mask is similar-ish in design, but it's more angular and pointed, and it's got these sort of clear seams at the front. Of where again it's masquerading as a more it's designed to look a little bit to, for one, evoke the shape of the teeth with all the points, and also to clearly show a difference in character between Kitana and Melina. And here this is more so to kind of say that it looks a little bit more kind of, it creates this almost weird face shape to it, of where it's because of the little bits of depth there, it has this almost like, again, like a face shape to it. But yeah, I think I've maybe spent a little bit too much time talking about that. But yeah, I think the mask looks interesting with the sort of big cheekbones. The big cheekbone thing sort of comes from the movie, the original movie, where it has like a little mouth on it, and that's something which I kind of like, is the sort of give it almost a mouth shape. Even though I don't think you'd be seeing the tongue shoot through this mask, I think it just looks more interesting to kind of evoke that as an idea, and so it has that kind of look to it. So the core sort of coat robe thing that I've gone for here has a snake skin pattern on it. I'm going to have to hand draw that because I don't have any brushes that will do that sort of thing for me. So I have to hand draw that pattern in, meaning that will take a little while to do. But I think that makes the robe, the basic robe, look a little bit more interesting. And again, it adds to the sort of shabbier look. It makes it look... It looks kind of sleazy. Snakeskin or stuff like that, like crocodile skin, all looks kind of sleazy. There is a connotation whenever you put that on a character's clothing, but here it's more thematic. It's again not supposed to look sleazy, but it's part of the sort of shabbier look of a lot of things. And adding all these extra little lines and things like that adds a sort of a kind of mess to it, of where it looks less kind of clean whenever there's that extra little bit of messiness there. There's the bandolier on his belt. So far, I think this is the first character who has a clear like belt buckle that I've drawn onto their design. A lot of characters, it's mostly robes, a robe tie, or I think, no, Sub-Zero had a sort of hard leather belt that I gave it, but that was like a sort of it was designed in such a way of where it was like dense fabric, and it would have maybe a buckle at the back or something. But here, this is a clear belt buckle at the front, of where the it's kind of loose, and you can see that it then ties up to this piece on the front. So the idea is that the robe maybe would be a little loose, that it wouldn't be fitting quite right. Maybe you could tie that into the shapeshifter thing, that it maybe doesn't fit quite right. And so it's got these buckles that then tie it down a little bit on his shoulder. And so, yeah, there's then this under robe, which is maybe a little bit thinner, is maybe how you could interpret that, as, yeah, as being a little bit thinner. And then it's got these little lines that move through it. I decided to give him these sort of thicker, kind of heavier gloves, because, and they'd be sort of hard leather fabric, or a hard leather material, as you can see up based on the sort of the back of the hand. There's the sort of piece there. And I think most of the characters that I've been doing so far usually have, no, they don't have full gloves at all the time. Most of them are fingerless. But here I feel like the fingerless gloves, maybe I might add a little bit of shabbiness around the actual finger holes. The idea being that maybe he's ripped them so that they've become fingerless, something like that. So that looks a little bit more interesting, maybe something like that. I might add that as a detail because that'll look interesting. I think I might add a couple of rips to the end of the maybe a hole or two in the end of the scarf, just so that it looks a little bit more shabby. And yeah, there's these sort of, again, as I say, scales and more reptilian elements to his skin along the arms, so I think that looks interesting. The trousers are fairly simple, sort of ninja. They're fairly simple, sort of, yeah, again, like ninja trousers, where they're loose and kind of baggy. And I decided to have the boots be sort of entirely wrapped up. The idea being that maybe they're so beaten in that you can't, that they need the wrapping in order to kind of keep them on. But it's the same with the trousers, where the trousers are really loose. So the idea of having this little bit of all these wraps at the end of the leg, just to sort of, again, tie it up and keep it tidy. But then there's these very light bits of design on the trousers, which I don't want to go too crazy on. There's a little stripe in there, and there's this sort of central piece down the middle, which then goes down, has a similar element down into the boot, but that's again just to sort of evoke the ninja toe, or this little bit of rope at the front. That sort of, again, the idea being that it kind of needs to be on there because the boots are a little bit damaged. But I think that looks interesting to have that sort of element there. I'm conscious of time because I've been talking a lot about these design elements. But yeah, the color wise, there's going to be a lot of green in this, as you might expect. There's going to be some brown and some dark gray. I don't think much of it's going to be black. I think black is going to be more of an accent color here. For example, like the trimming on his coat will be black, and the sort of edges of the inner robe and stuff like that will be black. And I think the sort of band around his waist underneath the belt will also be black, but there won't be much black. Otherwise, the trousers will be dark grey, and I think a lot of the wrapping on his boot and stuff like that will also be dark grey, but a lot of the sort of leathery materials will be brown this time. I think his scarf will be dark grey. Yeah, okay. And his skin isn't going to be like too green. I think his skin will mostly be like a human tone, but it'll mostly be a sort of, yeah, again, a paler tone, not green or anything like that. Nothing too much. But I'm not sure about how I'm going to color the scales. I'll have to have a think about that. My thought originally was that I was going to have the scales be a sort of a just a darker tone, but I might have it be a sort of a dull green, of where it still fits with his skin tone, and it's not too similar in color to the green of his robes. Because the under robe, I think, will be a green as well, but it'll be maybe a duller green than the coat. Something like that. I'll have to have a think about that. But yeah, anyways, I may as well start after 15 minutes. So yeah, I'll do these details and then I'll be back to talk more, because I'll obviously have a lot to talk about with colors, because these ninjas are very much about their colors as part of their design. Big elements, so we'll have more to talk about with the colors. So yeah, I'll do these details and I'll be back for that. So yeah. Alright, that's our details done. I took a few breaks during that, and generally speaking it also just took a really long time, so yeah, we're 2.5 hours into the recording now, and it is late in the evening, so we'll see how much of this I can get done in this sitting. I might end up having to split this into a second recording, so we'll see. I generally try to avoid that. Especially because that eats up 2 recording days. But yeah, let me go through some of the changes I made here. I didn't make an abundance of them. I just sort of downplayed some of the scales on his body. It's pretty much entirely just on his arms now. Kind of like what I did with the ice arms with Sub-Zero, where originally whenever I drew them they kind of rode up the arm a little bit more, but I ended up downplaying that a little bit more. But yeah, so I also downplayed the like croc skin texture on his coat robe, so that's a little bit more subtle now. Like from a distance it's not quite as prominent, and with the colors and everything on later, yeah, with all the colors and all that stuff on, it'll probably be significantly less prominent at the end. The only real like big addition I made is the rips on the gloves, so they look a bit more customized and that things are a bit shabbier looking there. The scarf I decided to keep without any sort of tears or anything in it. I just decided, it probably is fine without that. So, yeah. What do I need to do now? So I need to do the colors. I'll be doing the background stuff, and that will probably be, well, I mean, that'll be pretty simple, all the backgrounds of these. Mortal Kombat ones are just 2 colors, they're just a gradient of 2 colors. The central color will probably be, again, our main sort of green, and then the outer one will just be a darker green. Probably something as simple as that. I'm gonna have to probably think about how I'm gonna do a color palette on this, which isn't gonna look really manky, because green is our predominant color here, and it's very easy for a lot of greens to sort of become very muddy and kind of nasty looking. So I'm gonna have to try and figure out a way of doing that where it's not gonna look really manky. Okay, I'll have to think about that. But yeah, there's gonna be a lot of little accenting colors here, because there's the brown of the gloves and all the sort of, I would say, hardware of the costume, i.e. the belts and things like that. There's little bits of silver. I think the boots will probably be brown, and then all the little extra bits on there will be grey. There's going to be grey and black. I might actually nix the earth. Because if the interior robe is grey and the outer robe is green, there'll still be a lot of green in the design if it's just the robe and the mask. Because largely that's normally what I do, is just the robe and the mask, isn't it? Let me look at some of these. Yeah, it's usually just the robe and the mask, and maybe some like ancillary bits. With Sub-Zero it was just the robe and the mask. However, he also had a lot of other accenting colours like whites and black and silver. Because we're obviously going to be having a lot of black in here, and some brown, which I haven't been using much of, because generally brown is a colour that can get very muddy whenever you use it too much. But given the sort of generally Reptile has a lot of brown in his design, too much if anything, so I'll maybe not use too much of it. I have to have a think about some of these colours, but yeah, the green of the central robe will probably be the same green as the mask. I don't intend on using too many greens actually. The skin will obviously have a sort of a bit of a green hue on some of the edges with the scales and things like that. But he might have like a sort of paler skin tone so that doesn't look too jarring. Yeah, we'll have to think about that, but that will be a duller green most likely for the scales. But yeah, so that means we got 2 greens in play then. I think the interior robe should be grey, and then just the outer bits will be black. And then a lot of this other stuff down here will be black. The sort of trousers and bits like that, and then the hood and scarf be black. That makes sense. That makes sense, yeah. That seems like that wouldn't be too distracting. Okay, let's roll with that. Alright, so I'll do these colours, and then I'll be back to do the painted shading and all that other stuff. So yeah. Okay, it is now multiple days later. I am very tired, and I just ate 5 cream eggs, so I'm pretty wired right now. So I'm ready to get back into this. Okay, so what did I do last time? I finished the colors. So I think some of these colors are going to be adjusted slightly. I'm not fully happy with some parts of it. I think that green isn't quite right. It's too vivid for the rest of the color palette. I think the gray is too bright. I think the brown is too bright. So I think I'm going to need to darken those a little bit. The gray needs to be a bit duller. I like that it's a green toned gray, but it needs to be duller. And the green just needs to be a bit darker. I think it just needs to be a bit darker. I think it's just too bright. Especially on screen, it's coming out too bright, too vivid. I think it needs to be a bit duller. I like how the scaly parts of the skin came out, because it does match his skin tone reasonably. So what I did is I used an airbrush to erase away some of that stuff, so that it came out as a bit of a smoother sort of transition, as opposed to it being sort of a bitty transition. Usually I would use a sort of a watercolor brush, and that would give it a very natural look. But that would come out, as I say, a bit sort of bitty. And what I mean whenever I say bitty is that there'd be sort of like tiny little smudges and bits, sort of kind of little blotches and stuff like that. Again, as I say, more natural looking, because that's the type of stuff you would see and that sort of thing. But I wanted it to be a fairly smooth transition, and whenever I put the texture over it, the texture that I use is a watercolor texture, so that will sort of fill that in as that way anyways. So I made his eyes yellow, even though I don't think they necessarily should be yellow. I made his skin pretty pale, mostly so as to sort of go along with the green that I'd be injecting into his skin tone with the scaly parts. Yeah, I think that the brown just needs to be duller. It needs to be duller and a little darker, because it doesn't mesh with the black here. It's like it's too eye-catching here. It needs to be a duller sort of shade of brown. His skin tone and the black I'm fine with. It's just the brown, the grey here, and the green. And yeah, generally speaking, I've gone for very vivid colors with a lot of these ninjas, but with this one in particular, just the greens. Greens are a very hard one to work with, because they can get very sort of, as I say, a bit too vivid, too dull, stuff like that, and they don't print very well. I mean, I don't think this is a printable one, so let me see. That's how that would look in print. That's strange. So whenever I say in print, I've switched it to CMYK color tones, and this is what this would look like if you were to print it, because most printers use CMYK color. They don't use RGB. But this is only colored. This is colored in RGB. And there would really be no reason to even think about it in CMYK. It's just the type of thing if you were ever to print. And also, whenever I pull up this and you see all these grey areas here, that is this is the area of where something becomes unprintable. So for example, whenever I click into that, this is all the way over here, so this is clearly unprintable. But yeah, so I need to do the painted shading, and that will require me to dull my colors a little bit first. So I'll have to change some of my colors a little bit, and then I'll go through and I'll do the painted shading. Because yes, some of these colors I just need them to be a little duller. They're not quite right. They're a bit too vivid for what I kind of want out of this. Especially if he's supposed to look kind of shabby and kind of messy. Generally speaking, duller colors would lend more to that as opposed to bright, vivid colors. Because vivid colors, if we go by, I suppose, history, if we go by generally common associations in our brains, the brighter the color that someone's wearing, generally speaking, if you go by history, that would usually mean that that would be a more expensive piece of clothing. Even modern day, more expensive clothes are generally kind of, a lot of more sort of like high-end clothes generally tend to have very vivid, very sort of odd colors and stuff like that. It's because they're using very expensive dye combinations. And back in the day, just having dye at all was expensive. So, hence why I mentioned historically speaking. But yes, here, I think if we're going by this is a ninja at the end of the day. So I think it should be kind of dull and kind of, that way that'll make it look a little shabbier. And as I say, this is mostly going off of associations that you would have in your brain. But yeah, anyways, I will do these paints. I'll change the colors first, then I'll do the paints, and I'll be back to introduce the detailed shading and all those other little bits, like the light line and so on. So yeah. Alright, that is our painted shading done. I made a very annoying mistake early on, which was that I decided that the soft light would be coming from this direction. And then I had a thought that, that might be an odd position to put it in. So I checked what it was on all the other Mortal Kombat drawings, and the soft light always comes from this direction in all the other Mortal Kombat drawings. So I decided, I should change that. So I tried to just simply flip it, and then I quickly realized that would not be an option. Mercifully, I only made this mistake on the skin shading, so that was very fixable. So I just, and given that, you know, the hood conceals a lot of the face, that meant that I could just leave that as fairly neutrally lit, and that was usually fine. But when it came to the arms, I had to redo that. Mercifully, again, it didn't take very long, but it is annoying nonetheless. So yeah, from there on, at least I knew what to do. And that means our light line is going to be coming from this side, as per usual on the Mortal Kombat drawings, and that will be a lot easier to put it there than it would be to put it elsewhere. So yeah, I fixed all the colors and everything like that. I think that green is a little bit more fitting. It's the same with the brown and the grey. The grey is still sharp and it's still very green. It's still fairly green toned grey, which is obviously what I want. And the brown is again a little bit darker, a little bit more fitting. It still stands out against the black here, but it's not so bright, because before it was very bright. But yeah. So now all I gotta do is the detailed shading and the light line and the first gradient map. Something which I should mention is that I did select a color palette. The color palette that I've gone for is something sort of watermelon-y. Is the sort of general color tone of it, of where it's red and green are the colors. The darkest is red and then the brightest is green. I want to keep more green in there, so the green being the brightest color makes sense. Red being the darkest color fits because a lot of the sort of, again, there's a lot of skin in this, and you usually use red tones because skin is red toned. So yeah, it makes sense to do that. Anything else I need to cover before I just carry on? A lot of this stuff shouldn't take very long. This should be pretty quick, all things considered. So yeah, all I gotta do is detailed shading, light line, and first gradient map. So yeah, I think I'll just move on. I'll just carry on. I'll do this stuff, and then I'll be back to wrap up. So yeah. Alright, that is our Detailed shading, light line, and first gradient map done. Now I should show what my color palette is. So as I mentioned before, it's a mostly sort of, again, mostly green. There's a slight reddish kind of yellowy hue at the end here. Not very much of one, but a very slight one at the end. But up at the top, it's mostly sort of pale kind of lime greens, as well as the sort of middle tone being a bit of a slightly bluier green. But yeah, so I decided to go with the soft light and have that be 70%. So that's kind of medium. Not, I wouldn't say it's particularly high or particularly low. So right, let's have a look. What else do I need to do? I need to do a luminosity, because that will darken those colors. Not dramatically, really. Right, okay, let's put that down to 25. Keep that a bit high. What difference does that make? Slightly darker when it's below. Let's put it below then, I guess. Right, let's make a duplicate of that. Set this to be a color burn. Probably not going to want this one to be particularly high. Yeah, no, I would say not. Probably at the top, because you don't want it to be too dark. Set this down to 5%. Don't think we're doing anything particularly creative with the gradient maps today. I think we're just going to be sticking with gradient maps as they fall. Okay, so that's that. Now let's grab the texture. Oh, yeah, I normally don't like spreading these over multiple days because it can just means I have to think about it then for multiple days. I usually prefer to get it all done in the one sitting. That way it's done, it's dusted, and I get the sort of satisfaction of having a completed piece of work all in the one day. But sometimes, when needs must, it just has to be done. It has to be spread. In this instance, kind of had to be spread because I took way too long on my first sitting. But yeah, so let's throw this texture in. Set this to be 20% because the background's kind of light, meaning that it will be very, very visible on the background. Our scales are kind of a bit lost after all our shading. Maybe a little over shaded in parts. Over rendered, I think, is the term that a lot of people would use for this sort of thing. But I think, yeah, that looks alright. I'm content enough with that. It's just, again, as I say, the type of thing which you have to be kind of conscious that you're not overdoing it. But I think this is okay. I might even turn the opacity on it down. Now, so that's 15% on the opacity of texture. I think that's a little bit better. Again, the difference isn't exactly groundbreaking here, but yeah, ultimately I'm pretty happy with this one. It's hard to sort of separate my thoughts now because I have to do that in such a way of where, I mean, again, this is a separate day and separate city and all this stuff. But yeah, this was an interesting one, a fun one. The sort of process of designing this one, which obviously I talked a lot about at the start, which I'm not going to reiterate all that now because it was a lot of stuff that I said and I don't remember all of it because it's multiple days later. But yeah, so again, the sort of process of designing this one was quite challenging because I had to sort of think about what do I want to do with Reptile because there's so many different disparate designs and they vary massively between them, so that's the thing, what do you do? And so I settled on something which is usually what I do, which is sort of a middle ground between a few different things, but this one in particular has much more of a sort of push in a direction, that being towards sort of the more recent Reptile design in Mortal Kombat 1. That's definitely where the push is here. I think that's not like that's not like a big revelation or anything. This is clearly more inspired by that than a lot of the other ones. But it takes certain, definitely quite a few elements from a lot of the other designs. There's a lot more green in this, which is a lot more like the classic Reptile design. And it's got some elements of where it does have a few little elements of sort of Mortal Kombat X and Mortal Kombat 9, with a lot of straps and stuff like that. And then there is still the sort of reptilian elements incorporated into his skin, with the scales and stuff like that, the sort of spot scales and things like that. That would be, I suppose the term would be, so because they're only in very specific locations, being the hands specifically. And I mean, maybe there's some around his mouth. I don't know. Who's to say? Maybe there is some scales underneath the mask. I couldn't say for certain. Maybe there's some scales on the back of his head. I did think about giving him a tail, but I chose not to. Because I felt like that would be a little too much. I think the scarf is cool though. I think it definitely adds a little something, just as sort of one of his design elements to sort of make it a bit more interesting. Because I've tried my best to give each of the ninjas so far sort of one or two sort of key bits of design, whether that be sort of like the ice arms on Sub-Zero, or the sort of a lot of the wrapping on Scorpion, or the sort of again the more sort of form-fitting kind of look that I went for with Kitana, of where it's sort of it's sort of all the one piece thing. There's not much sort of like all these. There's not many extra bits that are sitting on top. It's all sort of the one piece costume for the most part. And then with Melina, it was a sort of a. It was a design thesis of just again have it be. Well, I was about to say function. But yeah, well, I suppose no, it would be very functional, of where it's like literally all you need is there in terms of the clothing for combat. Generally speaking, you're not going to want to wear too much whenever you're fighting. Hence why a boxer would only wear shorts, gloves, and shoes. That's all you need. So that's the sort of thing of where it's a top, bottoms, and then some gloves, and that's it. So yeah, again, it's very simple in that sense, and it's a lot pinker than a lot of her designs would often be. And with this, again, it's sort of more the ninja, more the sort of weird kind of shabby look. But yeah, I'm happy with it. This is a fun one. It's going to be a little bit before the next Mortal Kombat one, because I feel like a lot of these have been, a lot of these Mortal Kombat ones have been very fast, the recent few, but it's going to be a little while before the next one. Yeah. And what else was I going to say? I was going to say something else. I don't remember. Probably wasn't important. Yeah. Ultimately, I'm pretty happy with this. This was a fun one. Not often I get to do a lot of green stuff. All of the colors I tend to use are generally reds and blues. I've been going out of my way to try and vary that up a little bit, and I think I've been varying it up well enough. But I'm kind of tired now, so I'm starting to slur my words a little bit more and kind of jumble stuff up. So I think it's as good a time as any to wrap up. So yeah, I will do that. So if you liked the video, do whatever it is that you normally do, whether that be liking or not. Or of course, prefer if you liked it, but I can't make you do that, so all I can do is politely suggest it, which I believe I've done. Maybe said that a little too fast, but I think we're going to just roll with it. It's the same deal. If you want to subscribe, go for it. Please do. I would like that very much. However, you don't have to. You watched to the end of the video, which is more than most. And yeah, if you have a suggestion for what you'd like to see me draw in the future, you could, leave a comment. I would like it if you did that politely. Only if you did it politely. I don't want to see an impolite comment. I'd rather not. You know what the subscribe button is. I should have mentioned that before. You know where it is. I don't need to say much more than that. It's below the video. Didn't have to say that, but I did. I chose to. And yeah, this is a very strange outro. If you choose to watch the next video, I will see you next time. So, with all that said, that is us. I'll say goodbye and I will leave you. So, bye-bye.